This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and today is Monday, and that means it's time for this 480th edition of MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Before we dive into today's topic, I want to say that if you really enjoy my content and you haven't subscribed already, consider subscribing. I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, in today's video, we're going to look at one of the most powerful forms of removal there is, cards that can destroy any permanent. It isn't an effect we see that often, since it's so powerful. If a card can destroy any permanent, that means it's the most flexible form of removal there is, since it can target absolutely everything that's on the table, including lands, and obviously, that type of effect is really powerful. To be eligible for this list, a card had to be able to destroy or exile any permanent. I excluded any card that had limitations on which permanents it can destroy or exile, so that means I didn't include a card like Ugin the Ineffable, since he can destroy only colored permanents. So yeah, this isn't an effect we see a whole lot because it's so powerful. However, the cards that can do it have an excellent track record, which isn't too surprising. There are only 21 cards in this whole game that can exile or destroy any permanent, and of those, 13 of them have at least 1 point using my scoring system. Speaking of my scoring system, here's a quick reminder on how that works in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours and World Championships, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point, and that includes events like Magic Fests and Grand Prix. Alright, let's jump into the list. At number 10, it is Argentum Armor, an equipment that makes it so the creature it's attached to destroys a permanent when it attacks. In addition to that, it also offers a +6/+6 boost. In a vacuum, the armor is one of the most powerful equipment there is, but there's a big downside here. It costs 6 to play and 6 to equip, which is an enormous amount of mana that you don't usually have time to produce. The armor saw play in a standard deck built around Quest for the Holy Relic, which allows you to get around that downside since it searches up the armor and attaches it to a creature, at which point your opponent definitely has to find an answer. This deck wasn't one that stuck around in Standard for a long time, as it was eventually edged out by another equipment deck, Caw-Blade, and that deck wasn't interested in the Quest or Argentum Armor. It hasn't gained any points since rotating out of Standard. At number 9, it is Archon of Justice. When it dies, it exiles a permanent. That's a pretty nice death trigger, especially because it's attached to a 5-mana 4/4 flyer that your opponent often has to answer anyway, so the best your opponent can do is get a 2-for-1 in your favor. It was played in both Lorwyn Block and Standard in control decks, and in Standard it was also featured in Birthing Pod, which could search up the Archon and sacrifice it whenever it wanted, which was pretty great. It hasn't gained any points since 2011. At number 8, it is Ulmog, the Infinite Gyre. Like most legendary Eldrazi, this is incredibly expensive to cast, but also super powerful. Ulmog's cast trigger lets you destroy a permanent, and because it's a cast trigger, even if your opponent counters it, they still lose a permanent. And if they don't counter it, well, they're dealing with a 10/10 with Indestructible and Annihilator 4, which will usually end the game on the spot when it attacks. In Standard and Modern, Ulmog has been played in ramp decks like Tron and Breach Post. Ramping into Ulmog is definitely better than simply cheating it into play, because if you put it into play with means other than casting it, you don't get that cast trigger. It is still gaining points, although not at an incredibly high rate. Ulmog isn't the kind of card that appears in every version of Eldrazi Tron, and that definitely holds it back. At number 7, it is Angel of Despair. This is a 7-mana 5/5 flying angel that destroys a permanent when she enters the battlefield. That means she represents a very real threat, and that will be especially true after she destroys whatever your opponent's best permanent is. In Ravnica Block Constructed, she was played in 3 of the top 8 decks, and all of them were control decks that looked to make the game go long to cast scary threats like the Angel. In other formats, the Angel wasn't usually cast. In Extended, it was put into play with Hypergenesis, and that deck actually ended up getting banned out of the format. It has also gained points in Legacy Dredge decks, which use Dread Return to reanimate things. However, the Angel hasn't gained any additional points since 2013, as reanimation targets have gotten more and more powerful. At number 6, it is Spine of Ish-Sa. This 7 mana artifact destroys a permanent when it enters the battlefield. That's a lot of mana for that effect, but the Spine also comes back to your hand anytime you put it into your graveyard from the battlefield. And that means if you can find a way to keep getting it back, you can destroy a permanent every single turn. The Spine didn't gain any points in Standard because there weren't any good ways to abuse it, but that wouldn't be a problem in other formats. In Modern, it was played in Krark Clan Ironworks decks, which sought to create a loop that allowed them to produce as much mana as they wanted, and you could cast and then sacrifice the Spine to the Ironworks as many times as possible until your opponent's board was cleared. That deck eventually got banned out of Modern, and if you want to know more about that deck, I actually did a deck history on it just a couple of weeks ago. Anyway, since the banning of KCI, it's been played in Urza decks in Modern, which love artifacts and can produce a bunch of mana with them. It has also gained points in Legacy and Vintage Mud decks, which specialize in producing huge amounts of colorless mana and casting powerful artifacts like the Spine. It's going to continue to gain points going forward, but that's true of every card in front of it too, so I don't think it's going to move up this list. At number 5, it is Ashen Rider. 8 mana is a lot, but the Rider definitely gives you your mana's worth, since it exiles a permanent both when it enters the battlefield and when it dies, and that means your opponent usually is going to get 3-for-1'd by it. It's another high mana value card that didn't see play in Standard since there just wasn't an easy way to ramp mana in Black-White, but it has been excellent in the Eternal formats where it often appears in Reanimator and Sneak and Show decks. It has nice synergy with both Show and Tell and Sneak Attack. With Sneak Attack, you end up getting both triggers, and with Show and Tell, it allows you to erase the permanent your opponent chooses to put into play with it. It's another card that's currently active, but again, all the cards in front of it are active too. At number 4, it's Vindicates. When I think of a destroy target permanent card, this is a card I think of, and I think that's probably true for a lot of Magic players, and that makes sense because it has exactly those 3 words in its text box. Vindicate can very efficiently deal with any permanent, and that's great. It gained some points in Standard, but it really did well in Extended, where any deck that was playing both black and white played it in their deck between 2001 and 2008. It also used to be played pretty heavily in Legacy, though it doesn't have any points in that format since 2014, as it's been edged out by more and more efficient removal. It also recently received a reprint in Modern Horizons 2, which means it's legal in Modern now, and it's already gained 1 point as a result of that, and it's probably going to keep gaining points in Modern, but it seems unlikely to ever catch any of the top 3 cards on this list. At number 3, it is Beast Within. This is a green card that can destroy any permanent for only 3 mana, but it does give that permanent's controller a 3/3 Beast token. One kind of cool thing about it is that you can use it to destroy one of your permanents if you're desperate for a 3/3, though using it to destroy other permanents, and especially lands, comes up a lot more often. It's a really nice tool for non-aggressive green decks. In Standard and Modern, it has done the most work in Primeval Titan decks. Combo decks like it in Modern in particular, since they are interested in the flexibility it can offer, and they aren't too worried about a 3/3, since they intend on winning before that ever matters. In Modern, it's been played in Scapeshift, Living End, and Amulet Titan. It's nice in all of those decks, but can be particularly nice in Living End, since you can use it to disrupt an opposing mana base or destroy a problem permanent, and then, when you cast Living End, you don't have to worry about the token, because it dies. It's also done some work in red-green Ponza decks, which like to blow up opposing lands. It even has a single point from a Vintage Oath of Druids deck. It's going to keep gaining points, but again, so are the 2 cards in front of it, like our number 2 card, which is Karn Liberated. This 7-mana Planeswalker has a huge effect on the game, since he can exile any permanent or go after the opponent's hand right away. He also has one of the wackiest ultimates around since he restarts the game while giving you a huge head start, since you get to keep the cards that Karn has exiled. In Standard, he was played in control decks, but he didn't have the most impressive showing there, largely because the format didn't have any good ways to ramp mana. Karn has thrived in Modern though, pretty much from the beginning of the format. This is because 7 colorless mana is the magic number for Tron decks, which can produce that mana on turn 3 with regularity. If you've never played Modern and faced down a turn 3 Karn, consider yourself lucky, because it's one of the hardest things to come back from. Karn's going to keep on gaining points, but I don't think it's ever going to pass the number 1 card on this list, which is Assassin's Trophy. This instant can destroy any permanent for only 2 mana. Obviously, if that's where it ended, it would be insanely powerful, but instead it's merely incredibly good, since it comes with a downside. Your opponent gets to search their library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield, and it even comes down untapped. Still, the flexibility and efficiency of the card have made it hugely successful, especially for a card that's only about 4 years old. It's seen play in all of Magic's competitive formats and is a staple in many of them because its combination of efficiency and flexibility is pretty difficult to match. It doesn't look like any card will be causing it to lose its number 1 slot on this list in the foreseeable future. So, those are the 10 cards that can destroy or exile any permanent that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. If you're interested in destroying some permanents, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card in this video. Before I go, I do want to remind you all that there is now Nietzahone merch. You can buy shirts and mugs from Merchland right now, and you can find the direct link to that in the description. If you want to make sure you're caught up in all 480 episodes of MTG Top 10, you should see the playlist on your screen shortly. And if you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.